You ever have one of those moments where you're standing in your kitchen, sunlight hitting the floor just right, and you swear the universe is daring you to blink first? Well, let me ask you something. What would you do if you opened your mail one morning and found out your whole life, every memory you'd built with your own two hands, was about to be bulldozed not by some unstoppable force of nature, but by a person named Karen with a clipboard and a grudge? Yeah, that happened to me. I remember it like it was yesterday, though if I'm being honest, the whole ordeal burned itself so deep into my brain I'll probably still be muttering about compliance violations when I'm 90. The demolition notice was thick, official-looking, stamped and signed by the all-powerful Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. Remove unauthorized structure within 48 hours or face daily fines of $100. Further noncompliance will result in a lien against the property at the homeowner's expense. All written in that tone you only get from people who have never dug a ditch or fixed a leaky pipe in their lives. I stood there in my kitchen, that paper shaking in my hand, my blood pressure climbing past doctor's orders straight into call the paramedics. I read it again. Then, honestly, I started laughing. Not because it was funny. No, it was the kind of laugh you let out when you realize your life just got hijacked by people who have zero clue what you're made of. And leading the charge? Karen. Of course. The self-declared queen of Pine Ridge, president of the HOA, and, if you ask her, sole guardian of property values and moral standards for the entire county. But before I get too far, let me rewind. You need the whole picture. My name's Jake. A few months ago, I inherited my grandpa's property here in Pine Ridge, 2 acres of what I still call paradise, tucked between rolling hills and a pond where my grandfather used to teach me to fish. There's the main house, an old barn, and most important for this story, Grandpa Pete's workshop. A cabin he built with his own hands in 1952, back when this land was still farmland, and neighbors shared more than just dirty looks across manicured lawns. Now, if you've never lived in a place that gets swallowed up by suburban development, count yourself lucky. When Grandpa settled here, there were maybe a dozen families. Dirt roads, kids racing bikes until dark, and you knew every dog by name. Now, McMansions sprouted like weeds. You get neighborhoods named after places that sound fancy, Tuscany Estates, Windsor Point, where every house looks like it was squeezed out of the same tube of beige toothpaste. And so came the HOA to preserve property values. That's code for keep out anyone who doesn't drive a luxury SUV. The old-timers like my family got grandfathered in, but the tension's been simmering ever since, between folks who remember when neighbors actually talked to each other, and the newcomers who moved in from California and start measuring your grass with a ruler. Enter Karen Whitmore, 52, platinum blonde, drives a white BMW SUV with a blessed license plate, which is pretty rich if you ask me. She's married to Doug, poor Doug, the insurance guy, who's perfected the art of nodding along as his wife lectures the whole room. Karen's been HOA president 3 years, and in that time, she's appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner for anything she thinks is out of compliance. You'd know her if you saw her, the kind of woman who times how long your garage door stays open and has opinions about the acceptable height for dandelions. The first time I met her, her designer heels crunched down my gravel driveway like she owned the place. Should have been my first warning. The first incident happened on a random Tuesday. I was minding my business, cleaning up some storm branches, when Karen materialized with her iPhone, snapping photos of my yard. She announced, in a tone usually reserved for prison wardens, that she was doing a routine inspection. For the record, there's nothing routine or legal about that, but I was still trying to play nice back then. She circled Grandpa's cabin, nose wrinkled like she smelled a skunk, then declared, "This temporary structure violates our community guidelines. It will have to go." Didn't even bother to step inside. I did my best to explain, calmly I might add, that this cabin was built 70 years ago, decades before the HOA even existed. I told her about Grandpa Pete, the World War II vet who came home with nothing but a dream and built every inch of this place with his bare hands. She smiled that tight realtor smile, the one you practice in a mirror so nobody knows what you're really thinking, and delivered the line that still gets my blood boiling. Well, that was a different time, wasn't it? We have standards now. Standards. Sure. The only thing standard about her was the way she handed me a compliance notice and strutted back to her BMW, the air still thick with expensive perfume and entitlement. That night I sat in Grandpa's old chair, his work gloves still smelling like honest sweat and sawdust. And I realized this wasn't about an old cabin. Karen wasn't just coming for my building. She was coming for everything my family built, everything we stood for, and everyone who didn't fit her version of suburban paradise. If you've ever felt the world close in on you, you'll understand what happened next. 2 weeks into my compliance period, Karen ramped things up, shortened my deadline, claimed emergency safety violations. Mind you, that cabin had stood through hurricanes and blizzards, but suddenly it was an urgent hazard. She dragged out a county inspector, her golf buddy, as I'd find out, who spent 10 minutes poking around, then declared the place condemned. Health and safety hazard to the entire community, Karen announced, beaming like she'd just won the lottery. Now I could have rolled over. I could have let 70 years of sweat, sawdust, and stories get bulldozed by a fake emergency. But Grandpa Pete didn't raise quitters. I hired my own inspector, a real one, with calloused hands and muddy boots, who knew the difference between load-bearing and decorative. His report was a masterpiece. Not only was Grandpa's cabin rock solid, it was actually better than current code. Hand-forged brackets, deep-set foundation, timber picked for strength. The man built things to last. While I was at it, I got the Historical Society involved. Turns out, a 70-year-old cabin built by a World War II vet qualifies for historic status, especially when you still have the original building permits, yellowed paper in Grandpa's neat handwriting. And here's where things got spicy. Karen couldn't argue with the facts, so she changed the rules. Suddenly, the problem wasn't safety, but architectural harmony. She formed a design committee, herself and 2 cronies, who had approved every other house except mine. Funny, right? But her games were waking up the neighborhood. 3 original families came out of the woodwork to support me. Mrs. Patterson, retired teacher, started digging through old HOA minutes. Miguel at the hardware store, who'd had his own run-ins with Karen, started sharing stories. It wasn't just about my cabin anymore. Karen had a pattern, a bad one. She targeted anyone who didn't fit her perfect, beige vision. Single parents, elderly minorities, people who kept tomato plants in their yards. Her new neighbors, most of them just wanted to keep their heads down, muttering about property values. Meanwhile, the old crew, the ones who remembered dirt roads and barbecue nights, started meeting in kitchens, swapping stories and strategies. And let me tell you, nothing tastes quite like the coffee at a neighbor's kitchen table when you're plotting against a bully. The smell of it, the laughter, the shared gripes. It's the kind of thing you don't get in a Facebook group. As I looked at those faded permits, Grandpa's careful script, I felt something shift. This wasn't about nostalgia anymore. This was a fight. Not just for me, for everyone Karen had ever steamrolled. I wasn't alone. Not this time. But Karen, she wasn't backing down. In fact, she was about to make the biggest mistake of her HOA reign. You ever get that feeling, like a storm's rolling in, air heavy, every hair on your arm standing up, but you can't see the clouds yet? That was life in Pine Ridge after Karen doubled down. You could almost hear the clock ticking, and every tick was just Karen getting more desperate. Within 48 hours of my engineer's report, she slashed my deadline again. 14 days became 7. Daily fines started stacking up, $100 a day, no appeals, straight to lien threats. "You're putting the whole community at risk," she wrote in an email that sounded less like a concerned neighbor and more like a villain in a B-movie. You ever get one of those emails and just want to frame it for the sheer audacity? It gets better. She took it to Facebook, the Pine Ridge Community Standards group, where every post feels like a passive-aggressive casserole competition. Karen posted pictures of my grandpa's cabin, cropped, filtered, made to look like the last stop before the apocalypse. Don't let one non-compliant neighbor destroy our property values, she warned. The comment section was a mix of pitchforks and popcorn emojis. I almost felt bad for her. She really thought she could win a neighborhood war with hashtags and scare tactics. My counterpunch? Simple. I filed a formal grievance. Buried in the HOA bylaws, page 12, section 7, there's this little clause about due process. Turns out, Karen skipped half a dozen steps in her rush to bulldoze my cabin. Required notices, mediation periods, written warnings, all missing. The paperwork pile on her desk was about to get a lot taller. But I wasn't just playing defense. I emailed the local newspaper, Tomchen, the kind of old-school editor who sniffs out HOA drama like a bloodhound. HOA president targets veterans' family legacy, he titled his first email back to me. He'd seen his share of petty suburban dictators, and Karen was about to be his favorite. And then something incredible started happening. People, neighbors I barely knew, began slipping notes into my mailbox. Hang in there. You're not alone. Even Miguel at the hardware store, usually a man of few words, slid a pair of work gloves across the counter and muttered, "You'll need these before this is over." If you've ever been up against it, you know those little gestures mean more than 1,000 likes on Facebook. I started digging into Karen's real estate business. What I found wasn't pretty. She made her money selling Pine Ridge as a place with rigorous community standards. It was right there in her listings. She boasted about enforcing rules to preserve home equity. And her commissions? Let's just say they tracked closely with her tenure as HOA president. The conflict of interest was glaring. She was literally making money off the misery of her neighbors. But Karen was always a step ahead, at least she thought so. She called an emergency HOA meeting, packed it with her closest supporters, and rammed through a new rule. Emergency violations could bypass appeals. My compliance window shrank again, this time to 48 hours. The sound of her gavel, I swear, could be heard 3 houses over. The neighborhood started to fracture. The original families circled the wagons. Karen's supporters, mostly folks who'd bought into the Tuscany Estates lifestyle, rallied in her defense. Social media turned into a battleground. My mailbox, once full of junk, now had anonymous letters of support. Some people were too scared to speak up publicly. Karen had a long memory, and everyone knew it. The drive-by inspections became a twice-daily ritual. Karen's white BMW would creep past my house like she was auditioning for a role on Dateline. She'd snap photos, scribble in her notebook, then post thinly veiled threats online. If you've never been surveilled by your own HOA, let me tell you, it gets under your skin. You start closing your curtains a little earlier, watching every word you say on your front porch. But you also get stubborn, real stubborn. The pressure built until one day, Doug, Karen's husband, caught me at the gas station. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, eyes darting everywhere, voice barely above a whisper. "She's serious about this, Jake. Maybe you could just compromise." Poor Doug. You could see the battle lines had crept into his own kitchen. But here's the thing. I knew Karen didn't want compromise. She wanted to win. Total victory, 0 survivors. And I was done playing her game. On a Thursday morning, the nuclear option arrived by certified mail. 48 hours to demolish the cabin, served by a sheriff's deputy. The deputy, nice guy, looked downright embarrassed. "I'm just delivering papers, sir. Don't shoot the messenger." Behind him, Karen hovered, arms crossed, lips pressed so tight I thought she might crack a tooth. She added, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "If you don't comply, you'll be liable for all legal costs." Then she leaned in and dropped this gem. The cabin attracts undesirable elements. Coded language, you know? The kind that makes your skin crawl. That's when I knew this wasn't just about rules. It was about power and who belonged in her neighborhood. That night, my lawyer spelled it out in cold, hard numbers. Fighting the HOA in court? $5,000 up front, easy, and no guarantee of a win. The historic landmark process could drag on for 6 months or more. My insurance company wouldn't cover legal fees from an HOA fight. And those daily fines, they'd crush me before I even saw the inside of a courtroom. I sat in that old cabin, the walls soaked with memories and the smell of cedar, running my fingers across Grandpa Pete's leather-bound journal. Page after page, his careful script described how he built this place, why he did it. Dealing with bullies is like dealing with raccoons, he wrote on one yellowed page. Sometimes you outfox M, not outfight M. Right then, I needed every trick Grandpa ever knew. Because this wasn't a fist fight. This was chess, and Karen thought she had me in check. I started cleaning the cabin, figuring if I was going to lose, at least I'd have some decent photos to remember it by. That's when my hand hit a loose board. Behind it, a metal box, the kind you see in old detective movies. Inside, Grandpa's original deed research. Maps, surveys, handwritten notes, receipts from the county courthouse. And right there, a property survey from 1952. The lines on that map didn't match what the county showed today. I triple-checked the numbers. If Grandpa was right, my property line extended 50 feet farther than the current fence, straight through Karen's fancy driveway and into her prize-winning backyard. I stared at those documents so long, my coffee went cold. But that's not all. Miguel dropped by that afternoon, under the guise of lending me a crowbar for demolition day, with a nugget of neighborhood gossip. Doug had been at the hardware store, looking nervous, buying tarps and heavy-duty trash bags. He said Karen's been borrowing against their house for months, flipping fixer-uppers with credit she can't afford. If the market tanks, they're sunk. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place. Karen wasn't just protecting her HOA fiefdom. She was gambling with borrowed time and borrowed money. My noncompliance threatened the whole charade. And just when I thought my world couldn't get more complicated, my niece Emma came over with my sister. 8 years old, all sunshine and curiosity. She loved that cabin, running her little hands along the walls, asking about Grandpa Pete. She was still there when Karen showed up at the fence line, fake concern dripping from her voice. "You shouldn't let children play in that dangerous old building, Jake." Emma asked, loud enough for Karen to hear. "Why is that lady so mean, Uncle Jake?" I didn't have an answer then, but I knew. This fight just got personal. This was about more than me. This was about the next generation, and what kind of world they'd inherit. You ever get that feeling? The fight's not just yours anymore? With my last $800, I hired a pro surveyor, Janet. She showed up with more gadgets than a NASA launch and a no-nonsense attitude that made Karen's cronies melt. She spent hours measuring every inch, double-checking every corner, and when she was done, she handed me the results with a grin. "Jake," she said, "your land goes 53 feet past that fence. And Karen's driveway, her fancy landscaping, even part of her backyard, technically, it's all yours. Oh, and that HOA gazebo she loves showing off? That's on your property too. Looks like they've been trespassing for years." The look on my face must have been something. I could feel the universe tilt. All those threats, all those fines, suddenly, Karen was the one in violation. And if I wanted, I could charge her back rent for every month she'd been using my land. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, revenge, justice, what Grandpa Pete would do. I thought about going scorched earth, sending Karen a bill for $200,000. But when the sun came up, I realized something. This wasn't about destroying someone else's life. It was about making sure no one could ever use power like Karen did ever again. I sat down with my new coalition, Miguel, Mrs. Patterson, and Frank Morrison, Grandpa's old army buddy. We made a plan. Not just for my battle, but for the whole neighborhood. We weren't going to settle for a win. We were going to fix Pine Ridge once and for all. You ever see a neighborhood split down the middle, like a family dinner gone wrong at Thanksgiving? That's where we were headed in Pine Ridge. Folks who'd barely spoken in years were suddenly holding backyard meetings, passing around copies of survey maps and HOA bylaws like they were contraband. I'll tell you, nothing unites a crowd like a common enemy with a gavel. Frank, Grandpa's old army buddy, might have been pushing 90, but he remembered more about strategy than most generals ever learn. Control the battlefield, Jake, he told me, sipping black coffee in my kitchen. Don't just defend. Choose your timing. That man never raised his voice, but people listened when he spoke. Our little coalition grew every day. Mrs. Patterson dug up 10 years of HOA minutes, every infraction, every time Karen had interpreted the rules to her advantage. Miguel started a running list of all the families Karen had fined for nonsense, things like the wrong shade of mulch or a garden gnome facing the street. You can't make this stuff up. Sarah Chun, my attorney, joined the team officially. She loved a good underdog story, and she loved exposing dirty laundry even more. Quiet title action, she explained, establishes legal boundaries in court, ends all debate. She ran the numbers. 15 years of back rent for Karen's encroachments, over $180,000, plus the cost to remove her driveway and gazebo. Add indiscrimination evidence from Mrs. Patterson's binders, and the HOA could be looking at a federal investigation. You ever see someone unravel in real time? That was Karen. First, she tried to dig up dirt, hired a PI, trailed me around town for 3 days, probably spent more on surveillance than I paid for the surveyor. The best he could report? Jake buys too many scratch-off lottery tickets and talks to his neighbor's dog. Scandalous, right? Next, she went full bribery, cornered the county inspector's supervisor, waved around consulting fees if he'd take another look at my property. Little did she know, the supervisor was already investigating her original inspector for bias and irregularities. The county didn't take kindly to real estate agents playing fast and loose with public records. But Karen wasn't finished. She called another emergency HOA meeting, jammed the room with her cronies, and tried to push through a new fine, $500 a day for noncompliance, retroactive to the day she first laid eyes on my cabin. Mrs. Patterson was ready. She had a printout of every bylaw Karen was violating with her fake votes. She took notes in color-coded binders, the kind only a retired teacher could produce. Meanwhile, Karen's social media game hit new lows. She posted pictures of my cabin edited to look like something from the Blair Witch Project. Claimed I was endangering property values and harboring dangerous wildlife. She even petitioned to have my insurance canceled, accused me of running an illegal business out of the workshop, and reported my pond to animal control. Each complaint got investigated and dismissed, but not before Karen managed to tick off every county office in a 50-mile radius. I won't lie, the pressure was real. Some nights I'd lie awake listening to the frogs at the pond, wondering if maybe I should just pack up, move on. But then I'd look at Grandpa Pete's journal, read about what it meant to build something lasting, and I'd remember, no bully gets to write the final chapter for me. Then the twist. Janet, my surveyor, handed me photographic proof, Karen's trail camera, aimed right at my cabin from the woods behind her house. Problem was, those woods weren't actually hers. According to the survey, the camera sat 5 feet inside my property line. Illegal surveillance, trespassing, you name it. But wait, there's more. Doug, yes, Karen's long-suffering husband, showed up at Miguel's hardware store, looking for advice on divorce lawyers. Said Karen was up all night, surrounded by legal documents, muttering about conspiracies. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 days. She's not sleeping, man. She's not eating. She's just obsessed. That's the price of power, I guess. Karen's circle began to crumble. 3 HOA board members came to Mrs. Patterson, privately admitting they were scared. Scared of Karen, scared of being sued, scared of losing everything if the feds started sniffing around their discrimination history. Turns out, there's only so much loyalty you can buy with potluck invites and HOA positions. The local newspaper editor was loving every second. He printed a front-page spread. Neighborhood rebellion. Pine Ridge fights back against HOA tyranny. The county supervisor opened a formal investigation into Karen's inspector bribery. Sarah Chun started prepping the lawsuit for quiet title and discrimination, confident we'd win. Even the state was sniffing around, looking into Karen's real estate license. And then the meltdown. Karen scheduled one last decisive HOA meeting, the night before my court hearing. She brought in a projector, poster boards, a whole PowerPoint show about community standards and threats to property values. The entire neighborhood packed into the community center, every original family, every new resident, plus a newspaper reporter, the county supervisor, and a sheriff's deputy on hand just in case. Karen started her performance, clicking through slides, each one more dramatic than the last. She called me disruptive, accused me of threatening the harmony of Pine Ridge. She moved for immediate legal action, demanded retroactive fines, called for my public censure. When she finished, I stood up. Calm as I could be, though my hands were shaking. I asked for 5 minutes to respond. Karen tried to object, but the deputy reminded her, "Everyone gets a say, ma'am." I connected my laptop to the projector, and up came Janet's survey, GPS lines, aerial photos, boundary markers. Every improvement Karen loved to brag about sitting squarely on my land. The room went so quiet you could hear Karen's breathing. Then I scrolled through photos of her camera, trespassing. I showed the bills, the deeds, Grandpa's original permits, and the notes from a historical society. Finally, I played an audio recording. Karen caught offering a bribe, talking openly about bypassing the HOA's rules, even suggesting which families to watch more closely. Her own words, her own plan. Miguel stood up, voice clear as day. I moved to remove Karen Whitmore as HOA president, effective immediately. Mrs. Patterson seconded. The vote wasn't even close. 34 for removal, 8 against, 5 too stunned to speak. Karen tried to shout, tried to take the gavel, but the deputy gently took her arm. "Ma'am, I think it's time you stepped outside." The newspaper photographer snapped a shot as Karen was led away, her face a twisted portrait of disbelief. I looked out at the crowd, my neighbors, friends, people who'd stood by me when I felt like the whole world was against me. I made my offer, no back rent, no lawsuits, no demands, if the HOA agreed to rewrite its rules, install term limits, and protect every homeowner from future Karens. The community garden, the tool library, even the pond, open to all. The applause, yeah, I teared up. So would you. Doug filed for divorce the next week. The new HOA board, Miguel, Mrs. Patterson, and 2 newcomers who'd seen enough, started work on real reforms. Mediation instead of fines, transparency, anti-discrimination rules, and a grandfather clause to protect every original structure. But that wasn't the best part. The best part? Watching kids play by the pond again, neighbors sharing coffee instead of lawsuits, and seeing my niece Emma, beaming, at the cabin Grandpa built to last. And, sometimes the best revenge is just making something beautiful out of the mess they tried to leave behind. You ever notice how, after a storm, the world gets quiet, like everything's holding its breath, just waiting to see what comes next? That's how Pine Ridge felt the week after Karen's exit. Neighbors who'd barely nodded at each other for years started trading real conversations. Folks who'd stayed hidden behind hedges or thick curtains now came out, blinking in the sunlight, feeling out the shape of this new world. For me, there was a weird sense of peace. Sure, I'd won, But it didn't feel like a victory lap. More like waking up after a long illness, exhausted but grateful. I still remember standing in Grandpa Pete's cabin the morning after that legendary meeting, just breathing in the cedar and motor oil and possibility. You ever stand somewhere and think, okay, this is what it means to come home? Doug moved out of Karen's house 3 days after her ousting. Heard he got himself a modest apartment on the other side of town, where the only HOA requirement is don't set the building on fire. Last I saw, he was helping his new girlfriend, a kindergarten teacher, pass out cookies at the tool library we built in Grandpa's cabin. Funny how life twists around. The new HOA board got busy. Miguel took charge of community outreach, which, for him, mostly meant keeping the coffee pot full and never letting a story die untold. Mrs. Patterson started drafting new bylaws, this time in plain English. The first rule they wrote? Every neighbor deserves respect and due process. No exceptions, no favorites, no fear. They created mediation committees instead of jumping straight to fines. Started holding monthly potlucks, real ones, with home-cooked meals and mismatched chairs and way too much pie. And that old threat about grandfathered structures? It became a protection, not a target. If you had history here, it was celebrated, not bulldozed. But the most beautiful part? We turned Karen's favorite project, the common area where her $12,000 gazebo had once stood, into the Pine Ridge Community Garden. We pulled up her imported sod, planted rows of tomatoes and beans and native wildflowers. Kids who'd only ever seen landscape lawns learned how to dig, how to plant, how to be patient. The sound of laughter, the sight of dirt under tiny fingernails. Let me tell you, that's real property value. Grandpa's cabin became the neighborhood tool library, stocked with everything from pressure washers to hedge trimmers, donated by families who no longer wanted to one-up their neighbors, just help each other out. You'd be amazed how much good comes from a shelf full of well-used tools and a clipboard where anyone can sign out what they need. No questions asked. We even started a scholarship fund for local kids, seated by the fines Karen had to pay the state when her real estate license was suspended for ethics violations. Turns out, when you get caught practicing law without a license and selectively enforcing HOA rules, the state takes notice. That scholarship paid for 2 high school seniors to go to trade school last year. Kids will be building homes, not just selling them. The story spread. The local paper ran a series on HOA reform, the Karen problem, and how to fix it. Other neighborhoods started calling us, asking how we managed to turn things around. Sarah Chun, my attorney, got so many referrals for boundary disputes and HOA nightmares. She joked about buying stock in aspirin and coffee. I guess what I'm saying is all that pain and drama? We turned it into something worth more than a property line or a cabin or even a lawsuit. We got our neighborhood back. We remembered that community isn't just a word you print on a real estate flyer. It's the messy, noisy, beautiful thing you make together over coffee, over fences, over the scars left behind by people who forgot what being a neighbor actually means. And Karen? Last I heard, she moved to Arizona, took a job consulting online, far away from actual neighborhoods, actual people. Her real estate license got suspended. Her old house eventually sold, and the new family, bless them, brought back Friday night bonfires. Doug started fixing up bikes for the kids in his new building, and if you ask me, he smiles more now than he ever did behind Karen's shadow. But that's not the whole story. See, this wasn't just about beating a petty tyrant. It was about learning, sometimes the hard way, that justice is a team sport. That standing up for yourself, especially when you're scared and tired and outnumbered, is how you give other people permission to stand up too. You ever wonder, if you're not the fighting type, what difference you can actually make? Let me tell you, all it takes is one person to say enough. One person to put their name on a complaint, or show up at a meeting, or just refuse to be bullied. People notice. They start to wake up one by one, until suddenly you've got a whole crowd behind you, and the bully, no matter how loud, suddenly doesn't seem so big anymore. A few months after the dust settled, my niece Emma brought her third-grade class to Grandpa's cabin on a field trip. 20 kids, wide-eyed, tracing the grain in the log walls, asking a million questions about the old days. Watching them, I realized this is what legacy actually means. Not the stuff, not the titles, not even the land. It's the way you treat people, the stories you pass down, the courage you lend to others when they need it most. As the class was leaving, Emma tugged my sleeve and said, "Uncle Jake, will this cabin still be here when I'm grown up?" I knelt down, looked her in the eye, and promised, as long as there are people here who care, this cabin isn't going anywhere. Sometimes I sit out by the pond at dusk, watch the fireflies come out, and think about all the quiet heroes. Mrs. Patterson with her binders, Miguel with his coffee, Frank with his quiet wisdom, Sarah with her ironclad will, even Doug, for finally stepping out of the shadows. You want to know the truth? Most victories aren't loud. They happen one act of courage, one act of kindness, at a time. So, if you're listening to this and you're facing your own version of Karen, maybe it's an HOA or a boss or a system that's rigged against you, just remember, you're stronger than you think. You're not alone, even when it feels like it. And sometimes, the thing that breaks you open is the same thing that lets the light in. I read every story people send me, every comment, every message about fights lost and won, lessons learned the hard way. And I always reply when I can, because the world needs more voices pushing back against petty power, more communities rebuilt out of the ashes of someone else's ego. Drop your story in the comments, share it, don't hold back. You never know who you'll inspire, who'll feel less alone. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, I've got a lifetime's worth. And hey, if you think this was wild, just wait till you hear about the city council member who tried to steal my neighbor's business license. Let's just say, some folks never learn, but around here, we know how to stand together. Until next time, remember what Grandpa Pete always wrote. Sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful they can never tear down. So now, if you're still with me after all this, if you're listening with your own memory of a neighbor's glare or the echo of some rulebook-wielding tyrant, I want you to pause and ask yourself, what would you do if your whole world changed in a single letter? If the thing you loved most was threatened not by disaster or accident, but by someone's need to control what they never built? Would you walk away? Would you stand up? Would you wait for someone else to save the day, or would you put on your boots, pour a cup of coffee, and decide, this time it's my turn? I can't promise it'll be easy. Standing up gets messy. You'll lose sleep. You'll lose your temper, probably more than once. You might even lose friends who never understood the fight was bigger than one property, one garden, one old cabin. There'll be days when you question if it's worth it at all. But here's the truth. If you don't take a stand, who will? If you don't fight for your memories, your family, your right to be a little different, the world just keeps shrinking, one Karen at a time. And what you do, what you build, matters more than you think. Every act of kindness, every honest handshake, every kid you teach to fish or plant or fix something with their own hands, that's the stuff that lasts. That's what community really means. You ever wonder why stories like mine get people fired up? It's not because I won. It's because we all know what it's like to be pushed around by someone with a little power and a lot of ego. We all dream about what might happen if, just once, the tables turned and the bully got what they deserved. But the best stories aren't about revenge. They're about rebuilding. About making the kind of place where, even after the worst of it, you'd still choose to stay. Where your neighbors have your back and your enemies are forced, if not to love you, to at least respect the boundary lines. I'm not some superhero. I'm just a stubborn guy with a family legacy, a stack of old papers, and a circle of friends who refuse to look away. And if I could do it, scraping by one small victory at a time, so can you. So here's what I want you to do. Tell your story. Drop it in the comments below. Was it a Karen, a board, a system that wouldn't listen? Was it a fight you won, or one you're still fighting? Did you find your own allies, or are you still searching? Because there's strength in sharing. There's hope in every lesson, even the ones that sting. And while you're at it, invite someone else to listen. Hit subscribe not just for me, but for everyone who needs to hear that they aren't alone, that justice is possible, that a handful of good people can make a difference when it really counts. You want the next chapter? Stick around. Next week, I'll tell you about the time our own city council tried to play games with my neighbor's business license and, spoiler alert, found out what happens when a small town has finally had enough. But before you go, let me leave you with Grandpa Pete's last journal entry. I found it tucked behind a loose board the day after we reopened the cabin. His handwriting, shaky but proud. Legacy is not what you leave behind, but what you pass on. If you build with love, if you stand up when it counts, if you make something better for the next kid down the line, they can never take that away from you. So plant your flag, build your garden, defend your cabin, help your neighbor fix their fence. Be the story someone else tells about the day a community remembered how to stand tall. I'll see you next time, right here, same voice, same spirit. And, until then, keep building something nobody can tear down.